I'd like to encourage you to check out the Facebook community forum for evidence managers. It's a private forum just for evidence managers and evidence custodians. And I've uploaded a PDF which will contain notes for today's session on there. You can download the PDF from the community forum and it's available to you. If you haven't joined, I know that we've got people kind of standing by that are moderators that are waiting for you to log in and request uh, admission to that group, and they will hit approve immediately, and then you can download that and have it available to you. So it is 2 o'clock. Uh, we'll give people about one more minute to jump on because we've got a lot of content to cover today, and we want to make sure that we get through it. And we will hit the ground running. Now it's 2:01, so I think we're gonna start. So really quick, we'll introduce ourselves in a little more depth here in a few minutes. But I'm Sean Henderson. I am the executive director of the Evidence Management Institute. So if you are here for evidence training, then you're in the right spot. If you're here for a business seminar or some other purpose, uh, you're in the wrong spot. So I apologize. And on my right, on my screen, is James Nally. You want to say hello, James?
Hello, everyone. My name is James Alley with Orange County Sheriff's Department here in California, and co-founder of the Chain of Custody Property Evidence uh, Training. So we just wanted to welcome you guys to the webinar today. Hope you find something that really resonates with you that might help with your day-to-day duties. And turn it back to Sean.
All right. Well, we're going to hit the ground running. This is probably going to go uh, pretty rapidly because I mean, the class that I teach is 2 days. James teaches a series of classes over several days, so we're trying to pack a lot of content into a fairly small space. And in order to do that, we're probably going to have to move pretty rapidly through some of the content. The good news is it'll be available online, and you can watch it later. But so we'll just hit the ground running. That's my website. If you ever want to check it out, evidencemanagement.com. I should have put James's up there, but
No worries.
I didn't. Uh, we'll put that up next time. So this is session one of a training class that we're calling the basic elements of evidence management. And today we're going to cover two things. We're going to do an overview of this training class and this training platform, and we're going to discuss some of the principles of evidence management. So we're going to scratch the surface today. So if you could bear with us, we will get to the meat. I mean, there is meat in here. There are important concepts and important things to learn as foundational principles for evidence managers. We're going to cover those today, and we're going to continue building on those foundations every week for the next 7 weeks, and hopefully give you some useful content, some information you can use, not just while you're shuttered in at because of a pandemic. We want this to be available for people anywhere, anytime, regardless of their circumstances. I do want to say one thing kind of before I start rolling is that the reason this training, I mean, it's free, it's available, it will be available 24/7 to anybody that needs a free 8 hour evidence management training class. But that can't happen. It doesn't happen. Free training isn't free. There is a cost to somebody. And I've been fortunate to have a partnership with Tracker Products. They're a software company, they do evidence management software. And they are my primary partner, my primary industry partnership. And they are the reason why I'm able to do something like this and able to invite James in to do this. So
Absolutely.
check out their website. Learn more at trackerproducts.com. I don't sell software, but it's a good product. I wouldn't put it on there if I didn't believe that. And they're underwriting a lot of the costs of this training, so that's
Yay.
always fun. So that's the plug. Let's go over the agenda. Today we're going to cover basically four things. We're going to do an overview of the training series and the way that this training series is supposed to work. I'm going to introduce, or we're going to introduce ourselves in a little more depth just to justify our existence and make sure that these aren't just two cranks that know nothing about evidence management. We're just pulling the wool over your eyes. We should have we should have picked a different industry if we were going to do that. But it's important for you to know that we have a baseline of knowledge and that we have a passion for this, and we believe in what we're doing, and we believe that it's important, and
Absolutely.
kind of give you our street credibility. Um, we're going to talk really briefly about challenges in evidence management. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that because if you're here, more than likely you understand those things acutely. We'll talk about some key concepts and then the principles of evidence management. That's what we're going to try to cover today. As I mentioned before, this is a 7 session class, so there's a lot of content that we'll cover every week. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because there is the next slide that tells you what we're going to cover. Next week is going to be what I think is just the most fun thing you can talk about with respect to evidence management, policy and procedure. I know that James has written a lot of policy and a lot of procedure. I have written a lot of policy and procedure, and quite honestly, I actually enjoy it. Uh, it's important to me. But we're also going to be talking about technology and digital evidence and automation. So next week will be interesting and important. We'll move then to intake and packaging. Then the next session 4, we'll talk about storage, organization, and disposition. The next session, which is 5, we'll talk about facility security, and then what do you do with guns, money, and drugs. Uh, that's usually something that people want to know about because guns, money, and drugs we treat differently than we do other items. Session 6 is going to be inspections, inventories, and audits, and then we'll wrap it up with talking about training and biological evidence and everyone's favorite non-evidentiary property, the bane of your existence if you
Yeah.
work in law enforcement. James, anything?
Just a quick dispo stats. That's what we're looking at with the non-evidentiary property. It's always good to make that pretty clear.
Absolutely. And I do want to point down to the bottom of your screen, and I guess you can't see what I'm pointing at, so I'm not going to do that. The schedule is subject to change and revision. We're taking content and condensing it. If we find that we have to make some changes, we'll probably do that, but we'll let you know. We'll keep you posted. We'll keep you updated. Uh, but we just had to put that little caveat in there. And another thing that I'd like to kind of talk about, James and I we're going to team teach this. A lot of this is content that's newer to James than it is to me, so I'll probably talk more this time. But uh, our goal is to team teach and to give you some different perspectives, some different voices. James has got a lot of experiences that I don't have, and I have some that he doesn't have, and I think that that's going to make this training valuable or more valuable to you as a result, because it's been important to me. I know it's important to James that collaboration is key. I mean, we're not going to see a change in the evidence management industry unless we start working together and partnering to find new ways of doing things and new ways of reaching people. And that's extremely important to me. And I know it is to James. So we're going to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I've gotten a lot of emails about, well, can I watch this? Do I have to be at every session? And the answer is no. Uh, Law enforcement is not the type of environment in any capacity where people have the opportunity to guarantee that on Thursdays at 2 or 3 or noon that you're going to be available for anything. So we are going to record this and put it online. It should be as soon as we can get it available online. It'll be available 24/7. You can watch it at your leisure. Uh, that is the goal. Now, in terms of how many days or how long it takes to get it up online, I don't know. I
Mhm.
think it's something that we could probably do today, but I'm not going to be the guy that does it, so I'm not going to promise that. But within the next 2 days, it will absolutely be available online for you to watch at your leisure. We are probably going to start reshooting some of these because the webinar was the fastest way we could get this thing to people. Uh, we felt like it was important, especially at this time, to do something like this. The fastest way to do that was use a webinar product that we already owned and just start with what we've got. But we would love to make this a refined product that people can use and depend on, and a platform that is going to be useful to people in the future because we want it to be useful. Uh, you don't know this about me, especially if you've not signed on. And I would make another plug. If you haven't joined the Facebook forum, if you want some notes to follow along with, you can join the forum and download a PDF right there. Uh, but there will be an exam. Now, if you've watched all of the sessions, there's no way to monitor whether or not you've watched all the sessions. I can't make any provision for that. Uh, and quite honestly, I don't want to. Uh, but there will be an exam, and if you complete the exam, there will be a completion certificate that will issue you after you've watched the stuff uh, and taken the test. We'll talk more about the test in just a second, but our goal is to move towards a product that, or more move towards a training model that is just like an in-person training, except shorter, more condensed, and you don't have to wear shoes. So as far as housekeeping, my goal is to make this approximately 1 hour of content. Now, if we run over a little bit, I can't promise you that we won't. We're going to do our level best to keep it at an hour and to be respectful of your time. Uh, but we're going to record this. The content we will upload later. After each training session, we'll do question and answers after we do the content, just so that we don't have those kind of take up class time for people that are watching and can devote an hour to it later. Um, the last thing I would say about housekeeping, I would appreciate your feedback. This is new for me. It's new for James. It's new for James and I. So I would really covet and appreciate your feedback. If you think there are things that we're wasting our time on, or things that we could uh, do better or do differently, I want to hear about it. I would love to be able to continue to improve this in its infancy, to where it delivers value and really reaches the audience that we want to reach. That's important to me, and I think it's important to James. He and I are on the same page when it comes to teaching. Uh, so let's go over some frequently asked questions. And I don't did I mention that we're team teaching? So I tend to talk a lot, but James is going to jump in.
I will
So
jump in.
that would be that might be one of your comments right there. Would the homeless man stop talking so much and let the guy from California speak?
Yeah, it's okay. When you
Uh,
pick up your bottle of water, I'll know that's your
that's
break
right.
time.
So will this count for state credit with post or another state training entity? And the short answer right now is no. Uh, the mechanism that I use when I train in a new state right now is I work with training coordinators, and they usually file with that state certification body, and they do the training credit. We don't have any provision for that, quite honestly. We're not working with training coordinators. I'm not working with IADLES, which is a certifying body. So the short answer is no. What if I can't make each session? Not a big deal. Watch it later. If it's something that you don't feel pertains to you or is important to you, then don't watch it. And the answer to this is actually wrong. Is there a training booklet or a note taking guide? The answer to that this morning was no. But it bothered me that we didn't have notes for this class. So I put something together, threw something together, put it on the Facebook forum, and I'll try to put it in that little handout thing at the bottom of my screen, which you can't see what I'm talking about, but we can put those out there as well. Does this replace a 2-day training course or a course like James teaches in California? I don't think so. Uh, this is a fire hose. This is an entry level class teaching you the basics of evidence management. There isn't a quality replacement for in-person training where people are networking and meeting people that work in the same industry. Uh, so I wouldn't consider it a replacement. Uh, it's just different. And the next
Definitely a good
here's
resource.
Yeah, and that's the goal. I mean, we want a baseline resource. Yeah. Do I have to take the completion test? No. If you want the certificate, then yes. Is it a certification course? Not technically. I mean, we're not certifying you. We're just at the end of this, the completion certificate merely says you took the 8 hour class, you took the test, you passed, uh, and that's pretty much what it says. So why take this course? Uh, Really, if you need a baseline level of understanding, I've talked with so many people over the last 2 years since we started this thing that asked if we could come to their jurisdiction and do a training class. And There are a lot of remote places where we just can't go because we can't get people to attend training. So, if you can't get to a training class, or if your agency won't send you to a training class, or if you can't get to one for a year or 6 months after you start, that's why we did this. And that really answers question number four. Why are you doing this? It's really to get people that need the information to get it to them in a format that is readily available 24/7, can fit any schedule, and it's free. It's not something that there isn't a cost to you. I will say that it's probably not free, but there isn't a cost to evidence managers or evidence custodians taking the class. So that might be a better way to say it. So so this class, what it is, it's a drink from a fire hose. James and I were talking before the class, and my first evidence management training class was at the Tape It conference in Texas. And I went there as a patrol sergeant that knew nothing about evidence management, and it was like drinking from a fire hose. The learning curve for evidence management is so steep. This class is probably going to feel a lot like that. Hopefully, by breaking it up over 7 days, there will be a little bit less. There'll be more time to absorb the content. But what we're really going to get into are some key concepts, some principles that are important. We'll talk about standards and best practices. We'll talk about the basic elements of evidence management, and then what do you do with the other stuff, the special considerations? What do you do with guns? What do you do with money? What do you do with drugs? What do you do with biological evidence? How does all that work? And we're going to condense it and pack it into what we hope is 7 hours. So, what the course is not, uh, some key differences from a live training course. This is going to be extremely condensed. We have to leave out a lot of material just to cover the basics. Uh, it's not a certification course. Right now, it's not an accredited course for a state post or certifying body. There's not really a training guide, although we'll make notes available to you. Uh, the pace of this thing is going to be really fast. The best way for most people to learn, and I come from an education background before I was a cop, is people need time to digest information and time to ask questions. We don't have that environment here. We can't do that in this live training platform. Uh, so there are some significant key differences. Our training classes, I'm sure James is the same way. I try to make my training laden with resources. I want people to walk away from my training course with resources that they can apply directly to their agency. And I think you'll be able to do that with this, but it's not going to be the same. This is not interactive. We don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the time, and there's no networking opportunity. Now, there is a networking opportunity if you'll go, and I'm sounding like a dead horse, but that Facebook community forum, that right now, that's our availability for networking as evidence
And
managers and evidence custodians. There have been some
there's
really cool
some
things.
there
Go
are
ahead.
there's some amazing questions that have been posted already that I've never even heard before. So I think that that's a great resource for everyone kind of putting in their 2 cents, and you'll get the spectrum from the craziest way to handle something to the most moderate, and that's a great way of getting your issue or your problem resolved. So check it out.
Absolutely. And like James posted he actually posted one of the first things on there. He posted his video, his packaging video for Orange County. And I saw that and that is that's cool. I mean, that's why we do this kind of thing because there's cool stuff going on. And I teach evidence management training. I've never really seen anything done that well to that degree.
Right.
Uh, so I was like, I think I'm going to steal that as my own.
Hey,
But
just
instead,
to add on to
you know,
that, we're doing the dark side of the lockers also. So if your agency has something you want to highlight, whether it's some computer software, peripheral, or even a procedure or process, the way you do something, or even a cool lunch spot in your area, send it my way. I'd love to do a profile on that and kind of highlight your agency with that dark side of the lockers video presentation, and then we'll post it right back on the Facebook page. So appreciate
awesome.
it. We'll share my
Awesome.
email at the end.
That's going to be cool. So another thing that we're not able to focus on that I focus on in my training class is problem solving. I mean, I hate spending time. I hate investing time talking about problems, talking about all the horrible things that can happen to an evidence unit. I don't spend any time on that because we know those things exist. I like to focus my time on problem solving and teaching problem solving skills and teaching how to solve problems that are specific to evidence managers. We're not going to be able to spend as much time with that in this course. It's another reason to go to a 2-day class. And the last thing is, this isn't regional. I mean, we have people from Canada, we have people from all across the United States, from one coast to the other. And again, I'm going to show my geographical ignorance, but we have people from Texas and we have people from Minnesota and North Dakota online. I mean, everywhere. So we have to be very general with what we're saying because we want it to apply to everybody that's online.
Absolutely.
So that being said, the completion exam will be no big deal. It'll be 25 questions. After the training series is over, we will post the link to the completion exam. And when you take that exam, if you pass, the certificate will be downloaded immediately after the exam. So this is not a big ceremony thing. I mean, it's going to be fast and it'll be available immediately to you as soon as you're done. So, all that being said, I mean, we've talked for 20 minutes and it's time to tell you who we are. And we're almost ready to start the rest of the story. But it was important for us to get those things out in this first session, just some housekeeping items, uh, just to put everybody on the same page and let everybody know kind of what we're doing and what the intention is behind this group. So, I'll introduce myself. I'm Sean. I'm the executive director of the Evidence Management Institute. I'm also an adjunct faculty member with the Caruth Police Institute, which is a collaboration between the Dallas Police Department and the University of North Texas. That's been a fun thing to be part of. I'm retired from the Carrollton Police Department. I do not, I mean, I didn't look like this for a long time. This is a look that has to be cultivated post retirement. And I wear a tie so that you won't confuse me with a homeless person. But I was a cop for a number of years, retired as a police officer, supervised the property and evidence unit and the crime scene unit at Carrollton for a number of years. I was on the board of directors at TAPE IT, which is a state property and evidence association here in Texas, and taught their basic class. I was also on the board of IAPE, which is another evidence management training organization. I was on their board of directors and taught with them as well. Before that, I was an assistant principal and a teacher, and I'm trying to make my bio about this long so that James can say and tell us about him. You want to share?
Oh, love to. So, just I want to give a quick shout out. I was primary, I still am primary instructor and co-founder of the Chain of Custody Property and Evidence Training Development. But it hasn't just been me. That was my passion. But there's other folks that have right in the trenches with me, helped developing the training materials that we use today. Just want to give them a quick shout out. Folks like Selena Grunning from Escondido PD, Rochelle LaPon from Pismo, Jessica Simmons from San Ramon, and Maria Saldana from Elk Grove. They've all worked tirelessly to help put on something for just out of the kindness of their heart. So, that's what we're about. We're hoping to continue that and form more collaborations with EMI. I've been working in the Orange County Sheriff's Department for 22 years in the evidence unit, 27 years overall. I've been involved in our state association, the wonderful California Association of Property Evidence. I sat on the board for 4 years as a vice president. I've been involved with CAPE for a while with some of the duties as a chapter president in Orange County. And prior to that, did my 4 years in the Air Force. And also just wanted to mention, considered a fentanyl exposure subject matter expert. So if any of you guys have fentanyl questions, feel free to email me because we seem to have been ground zero for the fentanyl in our crime lab. So we've had some experience with dealing with it. So thank you, Sean.
Awesome. Now, before I blow people's ears out, I got a comment on the questions that my volume was pretty low. So hopefully I'm not blowing your ears out now, but
That's better.
you are 100% right. I had it turned almost all the way down. Uh, so now you'll be able to hear every breath. So let me turn that down. That sounds weird. Uh, I just want to tell people kind of real quick about the Evidence Management Institute, what we're about and what we're trying to accomplish. Uh, my goal I want to engineer a change in law enforcement culture with respect to property and evidence. My goal, my in-state goal, and our in-state goal as an organization, and something that I share with James and Chain of Custody, is we want to see that justice is done for all the stakeholders in the process. I think it's really important that we never lose sight of the reason that we do this, and if we're not able to change the culture in evidence management, then we're gonna die trying. So that's really the
Absolutely.
goal, uh, and it's fun. You know, I've enjoyed this. I enjoyed being a cop, and I enjoy not being a cop. I enjoy not shaving. Uh, so that's what we do. Real quick, I want to go over some of our long-term initiatives, because we've got people on the line that aren't familiar with this more than likely. I'm always looking for partnerships within industry or organizations. I love working with people. I mean, that's one of the reasons why James and I are starting to work together, and I hope that this becomes something that we continue to work together for years in the future. I'm also trying to invite kind of an advisory board. So if you're interested in helping advise me and keep me kind of, uh, I don't even know what I'm trying to do, but I just I want to seek input, and I value input from people that work in evidence management, and I want to make sure that what we do is relevant and meets the needs of evidence managers. Another fun thing, since we've got people from all 50 states, that I would encourage you to check out: Cape and Texas and Florida and Arizona. There are a few exceptions. New Mexico is one, Missouri is now another. But states that have no state level property and evidence association really struggle uh, to get things done. So if you'll check out our 20 and 20 initiative with EMI, what we're trying to do is create 20 new state associations that are completely independent, have nothing to do with us. Uh, we will pay to get you filed. We'll connect you. It's that important that people get together and start forming associations to get things done. I'd also encourage you to point you to the e-health check. That's something that's available on our website. It's another free service. It's a self-assessment for your agency. uh, it'll just give you an idea of how you're doing. Our
That's great
future
information.
plans, we're going to start the Evidence Show podcast, and I'm hopeful that James will be a regular guest, uh, because he's
Say the
got a cool
word.
mic. He's got a cool mic and a setup too, so that's really all you need. Another thing that I'm working on, especially as we've got people from all 50 states here, is uh, I want to put on our website a 50 state resource for evidence law. I don't have expertise, knowledge, or even I don't have any of that information in my head other than just what I can Google. But I'm trying to build a body of work, and I'm looking for people that would be interested at the state level of working to put that on our website. Obviously, we're going to credit people who are working for it. I don't want to take credit for work product that is not my own, but I just feel it's really important to get that stuff out there. Uh, Another fun project that we hope to finish before the pandemic is over is it's really important for police chiefs and sheriffs to understand what's important about evidence management. We're going to develop a
Yes,
handbook that we distribute to chiefs and sheriffs, excuse me, and police executives about the fundamental things that they need to know about being a chief that's responsible for evidence management. So that's some of the stuff we're trying to accomplish. We're going to talk really quick about the challenges in evidence management. Uh, I,
challenges.
you'd think, right?
There's no challenge. No, you just show up for work.
Well, and that's the first challenge right now. I mean, that is one of them. But it's important for me to say this pretty much at every training class. What you do as an evidence manager matters. Uh, the work that you do when you come in and you take care of this stuff and catalog it and store it and make it available, it matters. And it matters because justice matters. And I don't think that people think about that enough. Um, and I don't think that we give ourselves credit for what we do. But I want you to think about some things. Properly managed evidence, if we take care of evidence appropriately, it's got potential power. It has the power to exonerate the innocent or to convict the guilty. It has the power to tell the story for victims who are no longer able to tell their story. And I've mentioned this in a couple of webinars, and I know that James has similar experiences. That really struck home for me when I was working a child homicide. That this child is never going to be able to tell their story. So the way that I preserve this evidence and the way that we maintain this evidence is going to be able to tell that story. Now, nothing takes away from the tragedy of that, but it's incumbent on us as evidence managers to make sure that that story is able to be told. The work that you do builds a legacy of integrity for your department. It instills public confidence in law enforcement and in the justice system. And right now, both of those things are not in great supply. Another thing I'd like people to really think about is that what you do actually ensures access to people's rights under the Constitution uh, and the Bill of Rights. So maybe if you're in Canada, I don't know which rights it affords you there, but the work that we do makes sure that people's rights are afforded to them, and I think that that's important to consider.
Absolutely.
So you're not a warehouse clerk, you're the curator of a museum. The curator of a museum of every bad thing that's ever happened in your jurisdiction. Now, it's kind of a gross museum. You don't necessarily want to show it to children, but it is a museum nevertheless, and it has important artifacts in it that need to be preserved. So, in my training class, I spend a considerable amount of time talking about the challenges in evidence management. We're not going to do that today, but everyone deals with pretty much the same issues. We're all dealing with limited resources. We're all dealing with limited resources of money, of personnel, of space. That is a constant, and that will continue to be a challenge for evidence managers throughout the industry. We're also dealing with the laws of physics, just space and time. Most of what you do is a race against space or time, either running out of space or running out of time. There never seems to be enough of either. Um, Legislative issues are fun. Every year, state legislatures write new laws, and James is very aware of California law and the things that they've done uh,
Yes.
that impact us. There are unintended consequences for their actions, and we get to deal with the results of that. Digital evidence is a tidal wave in our industry, and it's something that we need to be prepared to stay afloat in. I would say probably the two biggest challenges in evidence management for me and my experience, one was organizational ignorance, just organizations that are ignorant of why evidence is important, and then dealing with people. uh, I spent a little bit of time in my training class, I know that James does too, talking about just dealing with people and how to make that work for you as an organization. So we've made you aware of the challenges. We haven't given you any resources or strategies to fix that, but now you know, and we'll talk about those later, hopefully. Here's what I think is the biggest challenge in evidence management. If you
Woo.
look at this, these are the gears. Evidence management is an extremely complex process, and every single piece and gear impacts another gear. You can't pull one gear out of that equation and the machine is not going to work. And those gears are all important. And if you look, I mean, policy and procedure, intake, workflow, management, automation, training, the facility that you work in, security, all of those gears are incredibly important. And we're going to try to teach you what is important about each of those gears over the next 6 weeks of this training series, just to give you a baseline of understanding the machine that you're working with. Uh, you'll still need to learn more in order to be a an optimal operator of that machinery, but we're going to make you aware of that machine and how it ought to work in your environment.
Yeah, Sean, I look at your graphic and I say, wow, that's an amazingly complicated graphic with a lot of moving parts. And the one thing I don't see is the outcome over here on the far side. And I just want to mention the outcome is staying afloat. The outcome is making your agency look good, uh, taking care of yourself, your unit, and staying more than status quo, trying to stay above water, which is difficult in these times, obviously.
Absolutely. I mean, it's keeping that machine up and running. I mean, is a non-negotiable. And if we know that one gear can wreck the whole thing, it's really important to pay attention to each of them and
Absolutely.
to maintain that machine because there are negative consequences for failure. Uh, we'll talk about some key concepts in evidence management. I'm going to skip over that slide just to save time. But the first concept I want to talk about is something that might be unique or might be new for some of you. I think we've all heard of chain of custody as a concept and as a principle, but I think it's really important to look beyond a traditional chain of custody record and a traditional chain of custody and really kind of our our uh, expand our view of chain of custody. You want to talk about what chain of custody is?
Absolutely. Well, I guess what we're keying here on is the fact that chain of custody is what we perceive as just uh, the booking process, the storage process, when there's actually so much more to chain of custody. There's how it's stored, where it's stored, the security revolving around how the item is maintained. And I think that's what the whole concept of 360 chain of custody is not just the linear movement of it, but all the other information that surrounds that, the integrity aspects of the element. Is that pretty close to what you're thinking, Sean?
Yeah, and I think that at its root, at its core, and I'm gonna adjust in my chair here, and that looks awkward, but yeah, chain of custody. I mean, it's been around. The concept has been around for years. I mean, centuries. I can't prove that because I'm not good at history, but chain of custody is basically the state's record that says this item is the item, positively identified as the item that connects this person to this place or this offense. And it also kind of goes a little bit further and says that this item hasn't been altered, hasn't been changed, hasn't been tampered with the whole time that you've had it in your custody. That's why we keep that chain of custody record. But when you think about that, and when we think about a traditional chain of custody record, uh, most of us think about like a little list, a record that details the what, when, where, why, and how. It came in on this date. This person submitted it. It went to this location. It then moved to this location. That chain of custody record, sometimes we confuse that as sufficient chain of custody. But that record, just like James was saying, is linear. It's just a chain. It doesn't tell us anything about the actual custody conditions of that evidence while it was in storage. And that's important. Is it possible to have a pristine, beautiful chain of custody document and store your evidence in a room that is overgrown with mold? Yes, it is. So that chain of custody document, beautiful and pristine, really doesn't capture the custody environment. Is it possible to have a chain of custody record, a document that says, I mean, it's complete, it's beautiful, it looks nice, but you store your evidence in a closet that's unlocked and that the entire agency has access to? If you don't have security, so then your custody of that item, regardless of what the list says, is still assailable, and that's what we want to change. The failure point of traditional chain of custody is security, the security conditions that evidence is stored in, the storage environment that we store the evidence in, the conditions of the facility, and then just accountability processes. Do we do the things that we say we do? So I wanted to take a look and relook at chain of custody a couple of years ago because I kept thinking, even when I was working in evidence management in the unit, I was thinking this is not enough. I mean, it doesn't tell us the story. You could still attack this evidence and still make assertions about this evidence, even though I've got a pretty piece of paper to accompany it. So we tried to redefine chain of custody and take a more systematic approach. And this might sound complicated, but it's really not. It's
Right.
basically chain of custody as we've always known it, that record that defines what has happened to that item, and then adding a couple of wrinkles to it. Because when you look at chain of custody involves a lot of different pieces. Traditional documentation is one of them. Packaging evidence, the way you package evidence is a chain of custody document in and of itself. The accountability processes that your agency undertakes. Do you do inventories? Do you do audits? Do you do inspections? Can you assert, can you prove that you do what you say you do is important? Uh, do you have actual access logs that you can track and determine if someone has been in your agency or not. That's important. And then the storage environment that you store evidence in. I mean, what is the humidity level in your evidence vault at this moment? You might not know that, but you should have a record of humidity levels in your storage environment in order to be able to say, yeah, I appropriately store evidence, or I know what the temperature levels in my evidence vault are over time because I track that, I record that, I document that, and I can tell a jury without any hesitation that I store evidence in appropriate conditions. I store it under appropriate security. I store it the right way. It's packaged the right way. Here is the document that proves all that. And I go out of my way to make sure that we are accountable for our actions. That's when you have true 360 unassailable chain of custody that will stand the test of time and any court and any attorney that may try to assail it.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome that we could potentially in the future see chain of custody audit trails, since most everybody is now going to database management systems to see audit trails that contain all of that. How about a picture that shows the packaging materials and how it was sealed? And how about a location that reflects what type of location was it? Was it in the refrigerator or the freezer? Was it in general storage, and you could even go as far as to put security. That's the nice thing with having a database management system. You could add those fields to help bolster the audit trail, which is for most of the chain of custody. The linear chain of custody could be a lot deeper than just the movement of the item. So something to consider. And watch, there's probably already a lot of agencies that already do that on their chain of custody. So I'd be interested to hear about that.
Absolutely. And I think as law enforcement evolves and as we begin to take uh, evidence more seriously, uh, and as attorneys begin to look at evidence, I mean, there are like I look at in Texas, we started doing uh, blood draws on DWIs, and regardless of how you feel about that, most of the time that stuff when it goes to trial, it is, I mean, it's unassailable and because of the science behind it. Where it is assailable is in the chain of custody that was used to take the stuff to the lab or to store those items. So chain of custody is a weak link that is vulnerable to attack. And if we've not appropriately taken care of evidence, then we should lose those cases. I mean, that's just the way it goes. If we don't do the right thing, we should lose.
Hence the doubt.
So let's talk real quick about the item life cycle. Every item in the custody of your agency has the same life cycle. Everything has an origin, everything is collected, everything is submitted, everything is stored, everything is moved, and hopefully everything is disposed. Even the stuff that's related to homicides, eventually it has to get disposed. I know that it doesn't seem like that. I know that there are agencies up in Massachusetts where they've got evidence that's literally 100 years old. So it might not seem like that, but someday that's got to go somewhere. Uh, but at each stage, why is this even important? Every item's got the same life cycle. The reason that's important is because there's something important at each stage or something critical at each stage that impacts your operations and can help you become more successful. We're going to kind of blow through this one. That was a slide that probably needs to be edited. When evidence at origin, the two most important things in that life cycle are the documentation of that origin, where it was, where you collected it from, and also our authority to pick up evidence in the first place. I don't think a lot of us, and I'm speaking in general terms, but I am convinced that there is evidence being collected that we don't necessarily have the appropriate authority to collect. In many areas, I would say currency evidence is probably the biggest item that we probably, uh, under very limited circumstances, have the ability to collect that we might do inappropriately. When it comes time to collection, this is when we really can educate officers and make sure that we're not getting rocks on criminal mischief calls where there's no probative forensic value to the evidence being submitted. And sure, touch DNA exists, but on a on a lava rock thrown through a window, um, I don't know. You make your own call. And then we can equip officers to appropriately collect evidence, and that's where packaging is important. That's where packaging guides and packaging manuals are important. That submission policy and procedures are really important. We need to be protected and safeguarded by great policy and great procedures that are clear and able to be followed. Uh, and I'm going to kind of dance through the rest of these. Storage, the important things here, efficiency and the environment that we store it, the security that we store. We're going to cover these later. We'll talk about movement later. So I'm going to, and we'll also talk about disposition later. So it's important to understand that these things exist, and that they're important pieces of that life cycle at every step of the process. With disposition, the most important thing about disposition is sustainable. Do you dispose of evidence on a sustainable basis to where you're getting rid of evidence? And are you appropriately authorizing those dispositions? And we'll talk about that fun subject coming up. I like to encourage people to think of evidence as history. Uh, a lot of times, our tendency is to think of evidence as stuff or junk, uh, and I think that we do the evidence a disservice. We do ourselves a disservice. We do justice a disservice when we look at this stuff as junk. Now, believe me, I get the impulse to look at a room that is packed with stuff and see it as junk, but we have to reframe what we're thinking in order to make sure that we're taking care of evidence appropriately. Uh, it's important that we make sure that we understand that every item in there got there somehow. It's got a history, and that history is more than just names and dates. History is really important to those that were affected by it. So even though it's a piece of found property that you might think is garbage, and quite honestly, it probably is garbage, it's probably not garbage to the person that lost it. Uh, so it's important to keep that in mind when we're packaging, or not when we're packaging, but when we're dealing with evidence. It's really important to keep that in mind because it is easy to start looking at this stuff in as just volumes of trash, and I've been guilty of it. So I have to keep reframing. I'm talking to myself there. I believe there are four fundamental values, and we will use these phrases over and over and over again during this training: justice, sustainability, efficiency, and effectiveness. There are three metrics that I like to use to measure all processes by with respect to evidence management. Is it sustainable? Is it efficient? Is it effective? Is it the right thing to do? Is it done with the least amount of resources possible? And can we continue to do this for the long haul? Those are really important values to use to gauge your agency's operations. Here's one thing that I like to point out: to me, evidence ownership. My least favorite thing in the evidence world, and I had officers tell me this and I would cringe, and then we would have a little meeting, and I have learned to use appropriate language online during these meetings, but some of these conversations got a little salty when I would ask them, "Hey, you done with this case? Can we get rid of this evidence? I need you to send me an email." I don't know, it's your evidence. And that those were fighting words. And still I could just ball up my fist. And we had some very frank conversations because I believe it's important to really line out who owns evidence, because the ownership of that evidence is an important consideration. It is critical that we remember that submitted evidence is legally owned by the rightful owner. Everything that comes into your room is taken from someone or someplace, and it's not you. You're not this. I mean, unless it's owned by the state, that might be one thing, but it's really important to remember that all this stuff is owned by someone. Uh, that is the legal owner of the evidence. Submitted evidence, and this needs to be a policy thing at your agency, submitted evidence is procedurally owned by the investigator. You submitted it to me, you own it. The owner of that property actually owns it. They're the legal owner, you're the procedural owner. Evidence is submitted into the custody of the evidence management unit. We don't become owners of it, we are custodians. And it is important to remind people of that distinction and to make sure that that distinction is written into your policy. Uh, I think I tend to preach on that because it makes me mad. You have any thoughts, James?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a clouded area when you have your field operations folks booking in an item which is supposed to be submitted to an investigation. Well, if the investigation never occurs, or you have someone that's representing it, like the court liaison, you want to know that evidence, you want to know what person to go to. I mean, first and foremost, in a lot of these cases with dated statute of limitations, could be that investigator could be long gone by the time. And these are all problems we all know about. So I always like to try and come at them with kid gloves. I mean, obviously, as a sergeant, I carried a lot more weight with dealing with your investigators. But when we have an issue, it always seems to be let's take a look at it ourselves. And I think that's what a lot of folks are going through in the disposition process. Is they're doing what I call non-conventional disposition, which is having the resources and the tools to be able to run all of the information through all the databases and make a determination about whether that item is good to go or not. And I think that's part of your flow chart in becoming a knowledgeable evidence officer, to know when that item is ready for dispo. Of course, I'm not saying to put your name on it and throw it out the back door, but at least you have something tangible to present to the investigator, so he's more confident in putting his name on that document.
Absolutely. And evidence custodians are always going to be the experts on when it's appropriate to get rid of evidence. It's important that we take on that role, because nobody cares about getting rid of that evidence or disposing of that evidence the same way we do. So it's part of our craft, it's part of our industry. Uh, it's important that we accept that and learn from that. Now, it is 2:51. I think we're right on time, because the principles of evidence management are actually pretty simple. And if you've downloaded the notes, you've got them at your disposal. They're pretty simple concepts, but they're important and fundamental. It's not going to take a lot of time to go over them, but it's absolutely critical that your evidence operations are based on these principles. I've listed 12. There could be 14. There could be 8. Uh, excuse me. It's not so much the 12 that's important. It's that there are some fundamental principles at play that are absolutely integral to a successful evidence management operation. These are the 12 that I've found that I think are most important and most fundamental. Uh, so number one, which we're not going to talk too much about because we've already talked about it, every item requires a documented, complete, unbroken, secure 360-degree chain of custody from collection through disposition. I think the reason that this is an important principle is because we tend to put evidence on a hierarchy. If someone is bringing in a little one hitter, and that might not even happen in California, but it still happens in Texas. Uh,
What happens?
they bring in a little one hitter and it's a drug paraphernalia case. It's a ticket in most areas. Uh, their attention to detail and their care and their documentation of that item is sometimes less, uh, I guess, less, they pay less attention to that than they would submitting a murder weapon from a homicide. Now, I am not beginning to assert that a one hitter on a drug paraphernalia ticket and a handgun from a homicide are of equal importance. They are not.
Right.
But it is absolutely critical that every item that comes in is treated the same way, with the same procedures, with the same process, with the same scrutiny, because it is a slippery slope. If you let your guard down on a one hitter bong, then it is very easy to let something slip through inadvertently, because we've made ourselves accustomed to a lack of quality and a lack of consistency and a lack of completeness from our officers. It is absolutely essential that our processes are consistent. So that's why that chain of custody, that 360-degree chain of custody, is an important principle.
Absolutely. And I have to agree with that, that I hear our deputies far too often mention how insignificant some of these crimes are with regards to narcotics, and how folks are out on the street before they're even done with the report. And I get all that. But as you said, I think it's a nice, if you could find a nice way to remind them that it is a slippery slope, and that we want to see all of the evidence, and we demand that all of the evidence is booked the same way. Then I think they'll respect you more for that, and it'll help in their career later on when they become an investigator or move up through the ranks.
Yeah, and I like to remind officers that, this crime, it might be insignificant to you, but it's not insignificant to the dude you just put in jail.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you remove someone's liberties from them, we shouldn't take that cavalierly. And as such, if it's important enough for you to bring somebody to jail or write somebody a ticket, it's important enough to do the right thing. I like to bring things straight to people's integrity. and their consistency. When they want to slack off on something, I make it an integrity issue because it is, and that doesn't make me very popular, but I think it does make me right.
Oh, come
Uh,
on.
so, and I've never struggled with that. Principle number two, there's a little asterisk here. Every item should be packaged, uniquely identified, and stored in a manner that preserves the condition or preserves the item in submitted condition. Now, there are obviously some limitations to this. There are items that are going to degrade regardless of how we store them or what we do, but it's incumbent on us to make sure they're packaged. That prevents cross contamination, that protects the item, that they're uniquely identified, because that is a fundamental piece of chain of custody, and stored in a manner that preserves the item in submitted condition. That is all three of those things working together are important, is an absolutely fundamental principle of evidence management.
Absolutely.
When you look at preservation, I like to put it in a little matrix here because there are really two things at play. Preserving the item is one, but another kind of undercurrent is preventing cross contamination. Preservation has two roles and two functions in evidence management. One is to preserve that item, but the other is to prevent that item from contaminating the item next to it. And both of those are accomplished through a series of four different little puzzle pieces. Packaging is one, labeling is the other, the storage environment is a third, and the storage method is the fourth. Storage methods are important. We'll go over those. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I find it utterly fascinating. You might not,
He said
but
sarcastically.
when you store things in like a sedimentary rock method, well, we'll talk about that later. We're pressed for time.
Pushing it, yeah.
Um, Organization systems. I believe that evidence rooms should be organized so that any piece of evidence could be located by anyone, not you as an evidence custodian, but by anyone in under 5 minutes. And the reason that is so important is because when it comes time to dispose of evidence or find evidence or retrieve evidence, if it takes you 20 minutes to find something on any kind of regular basis, then that time is wasted time that you will never, ever, ever get back. And I don't just mean at work, I mean your life. That is 20 minutes of your life that is gone that you'll never get back. Utterly wasted. So it's important that we organize our evidence rooms in a manner. If it's, I mean, if we're in operation, obviously, if you're a, like LA or LA County, we might expand this by a couple of minutes. But for most agencies, 5 minutes is doable to be able to locate that item in under 5 minutes, any item. Now, that requires a few things. It requires a map. It requires that people know where to find things and they know where things are. It requires some kind of logical system or a logical order for organizing evidence. It requires limited locations, and it also requires limited packaging options. We'll talk about each of those when we talk about packaging and when we talk about storage. But remember that these are important fundamental principles for evidence management. The facility, this is the easy one. Facilities should provide a safe, secure, functional, and appropriate environment for storing evidence. You would think we wouldn't have to say that, but it is an absolutely fundamental principle of evidence. Principle five is intake and disposition. The important thing here is that we think of intake and disposition as related processes that are proportional. The holy grail of evidence intake and disposition is a ratio of 1 to 1. One item comes in, one item goes out. Now, that's a theoretical level. None of us reach it. It's like the holy grail, but we should be working towards that. And if you want to talk math, I mean, really, one item coming in and 0.75 items going out, mathematically, that's probably the lowest threshold that you can sustain with any level of success. And I'll show you the spreadsheet. It's beautiful, but we don't have time today. Uh, Six, documentation. And when we talk about documentation, it is incredibly important that our documentation is systematic, it is complete, it is accurate, it is sufficient. That is the foundation of chain of custody. Without systematic, complete, accurate, sufficient documentation, you have no chain of custody. That's why it's an important principle of evidence management. When you look at all the different types of documentation involved in evidence management, I mean, training, the way you train needs to be documented. The information you collect on that item in that case is important. The locations, your audits, and everything that you document is absolutely critical to that evidence. And we'll discuss each of those in greater length, but it is a fundamental principle. Another fundamental principle is that our operations and practices should be consistent with the law. Uh, Local laws and federal laws and any laws that you are subject to, the way we roll should be consistent with the law. Principle number 8, these evidence management systems have to work for everyone. If the way you do business, if the way we run our operations doesn't work for all the stakeholders in the justice system, then it is flawed. And these systems, evidence management needs to work for everybody. It needs to work for the evidence custodians who work in the evidence room. It needs to work for the officers who submit evidence. It needs to work for the defense attorneys that are defending people. It needs to work for the people accused of crime. It needs to everyone. When I say all the stakeholders, I mean all of the stakeholders. If it doesn't work, then it's broken and it needs to be fixed. Next week we'll talk about policy and procedure. It is principle 9. Uh, I think I might have skipped something. Oh, evidence management operations should be established by and documented in and conform to current agency policies and procedures. We'll talk more about this next week. It is an absolutely fundamental bedrock principle of evidence management that what you do ought to match what you say you do. And if
Absolutely.
what you do doesn't match what you say you do in the trade, we call that a lie. I mean, that's what we would call anyone that told us something that was inconsistent or incongruent with fact. That's a lie. Uh, we don't want to be in the business of that. Policies generally establish authority, duty, and values. Procedures tell us how to do things, and we'll talk about that. It'll be fascinating, riveting. Um, I'm sure you'll be there for that next week. Principle number 10 is personnel. Basically, personnel, the principle there, and I've actually flip flop through here. Evidence management operations should be adequately staffed. It is really difficult to quantify that and to say what adequately staffed means. But adequately staffed means that all processes and systems related to evidence management, from intake to disposition, can be sustainably accomplished. Now, you might work in an agency where one person is adequately staffed. You might work in an agency where one person is absolutely inadequate staffing. Staffing is a function of not just personnel, but the way you're tasked and the technology that you have available to you all impact staffing decisions. So I'm not going to give you a ratio. That ratio doesn't exist. But if you can't get everything done, then you're either not adequately staffed or adequately equipped. Accountability, principle 11, and I told you there are 12, so we're getting to the end of the rainbow here. Evidence management operations require multiple accountability processes. We teach, and I hope James agrees because we haven't discussed this before, but I believe in three practices: routine inspections, regular audits, and annual inventories. Those are processes that you should be able to do internally or with the resources that you have available to you, but you should be inspecting your operations. You should go through a regular audit process of your own operations. I'm not talking bringing somebody else in from the outside. I'm talking you audit yourself and make sure that you're compliant with your policies. We'll talk about that more, and an inventory process. Those are accountability measures that are absolutely essential to evidence management. Um, and the last principle is just agency culture. This is the one thing I can't enforce, but it's something I preach. Sustainable evidence management operations require an agency culture that values the integrity of evidence and the ethical delivery of service and justice. Now, we might not get to choose to work in an agency like that. Your agency might vary. But for sustainable operations, it really requires an agency culture where we value integrity of evidence. We value the ethical delivery of service and the ethical delivery of justice. If you work in an agency that doesn't have those same values, chances are evidence is not going to be too high on your list. So I am so pleased. It's 3:04. We started 3:01. Technically, this is an hour and 3 minutes long. That is the presentation for this session. That's all the material that we're going to talk about. Do you have anything, James?
No, nothing to add except I'll let you go ahead and talk about next week of policy and procedures. And my favorite, automation and digital evidence, is going to be a good one and relevant with a lot of folks.
Absolutely. I think that'll be fun. Even if you even if you have to struggle through the policy and procedure part, which I love, the automation is always an interesting discussion. So next week we're going to talk about policy and procedure, as I mentioned. We're also going to talk about technology, automation, and digital evidence. That is session 2. So that will be the same time next week. We're going to wrap up today. First, I would like to thank everyone for participating. I mean, we had like 230 people in this training class. I hope that you learned something that was of value. If you didn't, I apologize. We'll try better. We'll try harder
We'll
next
try
time.
harder next week.
Yeah. But if you got questions, I'm going to read through the scroll or read through the list. If you don't have questions or are not interested in other people's questions, feel free to hop off. But let me scroll through, and because I can't see uh, anything,
And while Sean's looking for that, again, if anyone has things that they'd like to highlight in their property room, feel free to send me an email. My email is posted already in the Facebook evidence management link, and or you could hit me at jnally, Nally, the numbers 222 at hotmail.com.
and just reading through a couple of comments here. Melissa Riggins posted in the questions thing. I think this is pretty cool. She has a sign in her evidence room that says every piece of evidence has a victim. And I think that is important to remind people that these things tell stories, and it's important that we take care of things because that story is important to someone. Had another question about I thought you never dispose of property in a homicide. Generally, that's true. Uh, if especially if it's an unsolved homicide, but I would say that every piece of evidence at some point they're going to reach a point when it's disposed of. It might be 100 years from now, it might be 150 years from now, but at some point we're going to have to make decisions with those things. Now, evidence on adjudicated homicides in many states, in many jurisdictions, if it's adjudicated, if all the actors and offenders were apprehended and incarcerated and adjudicated at the end of their sentence, a lot of times it's appropriate in many jurisdictions to dispose of that evidence. I know that Texas is a death penalty state, and when that is carried out, regardless of how you feel about the death penalty, I mean, there is no point in keeping that, at least under Texas law. Uh, Last couple of questions. Well, I guess there are more, so I'll keep scrolling through.
So let me elaborate a little bit about homicide evidence. There's a unique situation in California where the Victim's Bill of Rights has now gone through, and that's allowing us to do things that we've never done before, such as releasing victims' personal effects back to the next of kin, which is an exceptional, um, wonderful thing that we're doing now. And that's, I've only done it once so far, but it's a really rewarding feeling. It kind of brings a ray of sunshine to an otherwise really ugly and dark case.
I will say that California gets a bad rap for a lot of crazy laws, but
Because we do have a lot of
if
crazy love.
and you do, but if you listen to, I mean, if you're in Ohio or Texas or someplace, I mean, if you knew what kind of property laws they had in California, they're pretty awesome. So we'll talk about those. Hopefully, we'll get a chance. But being able to return things to people, and I mean, well, better than in Texas. Uh, so like, yeah, I won't
That's
go
fine.
there.
We'll trade our gun laws, but that's fine. We can
Yes.
go ahead and keep
Can
your
you talk about
decision.
retention schedules? We'll definitely talk about retention schedules. We'll probably spend more time on retention when we talk about evidence disposition. But since I've got you on the line, uh,
They may
if
vary a little from state to
it
state as
varies from
well.
state to
Yeah.
state, but it's going to be indexed to the statute of limitations for the crime and relevant statutes. We'll talk more about that. So that's really the non-answer. Uh, Someone want to know how to download or enter the notes for the course. They are available on the Facebook community forum, and I think I've got a note on that on the next slide. Let's see, I'll put that up. I could also put a link somewhere, but I'm not very adept. But the evidence management community forum on Facebook, I'll try to post it again somewhere else. And uh, Yeah, I can't see, but the notes are available there. Email me if you don't have Facebook. Sean at evidencemanagement.com. I will make sure that I get you a copy. Next time, I think we can post it actually online here, so we'll try to do that uh, and make that available to you as well. So my mouse is making me angry. Uh, yeah, we'll talk. And Mike had some more questions about disposition as well. We will definitely talk about that. Um, we got someone that's already going to come back next week. What was principle number 7? Sonia, that is an excellent question. I wish I knew that
Legislation,
off the top of
law.
my head.
Hmm.
Oh, good.
Law.
Wow. Dang. That's impressive. Because, like, I wrote this and I had no idea. Yeah.
I have my
Wow.
cheat sheet here, so.
Okay. Let's say I'm very impressed. So, principle number 7 was law. Basically, that we abide by state, federal, and local statutes with respect to evidence. Um, try to answer a few more of these. Can you see the questions, James?
No, I cannot.
That's something we will fix for next time. I
Awesome.
apologize.
Outstanding with tag team.
Uh, oh, here's one. This is a question for you. The appropriate or proper procedure for disposing of currency that may be laced with fentanyl.
Outstanding. That's a question that a lot of people have talked about. So far, all we know is that certain banks, like in Orange County, Santa Ana, we have an agreement with Wells Fargo where we'll bring it in sealed as is. If we know it's been tested and it comes back positive, we'll take it into them and they will incinerate it for us and give us the expected value of the money. So basically, they're switching it out, the U.S. currency. So,
Awesome.
but sometimes you're not going to know. So most of the time, you're not going to know. They said some study recently said that over 80% of U.S. currency has some form of narcotic attached to it in some manner. So, fentanyl is a whole different game changer. But if you know it's there, take all precautions needed to avoid exposure.
And Daria mentioned she downloaded the PDF and there was a couple of things that were missing, key concepts 1 and 2. I will say that those are pretty graphic laden, those 2 items. So uh, it might be your PDF viewer. I will double check that document and make sure that those are on there. But if you're missing what looks like a page on the notes, it's 2 graphic elements that I will double check. Uh, Here's a question about, and this is again, it's kind of a disposition question, but after the defendant was executed in a capital murder case in Texas, do we need to get approval to dispose of the evidence? Yes. And by approval, I mean the investigator or some investigator still needs to be involved in the approval of that disposition. It's also incumbent, and this is a Texas question, that we make sure that there are no unknown or suspected, unapprehended assailants.
Absolutely.
That's the other thing is just, and that's a case by case basis. So James, we have Casey Scruggs who is interested in fentanyl exposure information. She's starting to see
Absolutely.
that in her county. And could you please forward or repeat your email?
Absolutely, Casey. What state and city?
I don't. She might not be able to type real
That's
quick.
okay. That's okay. So Casey, my email will be. Let me give you the work email. It's going to be J Nally. Last name is Nally. It should be on your screen there, and that's going to be at ocsd.org. OC Orange County SD Sheriff's Department.org. Be happy to send you what we have.
And Tamara Jones mentioned, and this is another reason to join that Facebook community forum. The Secret Service that switches out their currency, damaged currency, for law enforcement in Missouri. I know that the U.S. Department of Treasury will do the same thing. Uh, so it's a lot of this is about relationships and it's about jurisdictions. But if you're in Missouri, Tamara has a resource for you. And the last question that we have, nope, there are more. Uh, can you make sure that you post the link for the PDF next week? Yes, we will do that differently next week. Absolutely. It is hard to find on Facebook. We will change that. So Casey's from Cookeville, Tennessee, and Disposition of counterfeit. Do you call Secret Service? Absolutely. Uh, I I do. I mean, I don't know if it's different in California, but I used to believe that the Secret Service didn't care about poorly copied $20 bills made by idiots who weren't committed to their craft. But the Secret Service, they really are keenly interested in every counterfeit piece of currency that is passed or attempted to pass or ends up in the hands of law enforcement. I can't tell you how many Secret Service agents that I've spoken to that have reconfirmed this for me. The Secret Service is very interested, and they are the ones that should be the receivers of your counterfeit currency because they catalog it. Uh, they investigate it if it's of exceptional quality, if it might be linked to an investigation. They have a database that is built around counterfeit currency and they want it. You can mail it to them, but I would contact your local Secret Service uh, field office and develop a relationship there. I know that in Dallas, our field office, those guys were awesome. I mean, they would come pick up currency. We could mail it to them. They would return it to me if we were wrong in our assessment of whether it was counterfeit or not. So those are some fun things. And last question is from Russell. Are there some good ways to get patrol officers interested in regular packaging procedures to do the same thing every time, all the time? And I would say that that is a tricky question. I don't know
Yeah.
that there is a way to get them interested. There may not.
Interested? Maybe no, but
We can't. We,
definitely,
we can't necessarily control the interested part,
yeah,
but we can control the compulsory part.
yeah,
And when we talk about intake, and I hate to keep deferring things over and over and over again, but the short answer, there is a way to hold people accountable for doing and following procedures. Excuse me. It requires some agency involvement. It requires a commitment, at least of the chain of command of the officers and in your chain of command. But one, it starts with procedures that are able to be followed. You can't have a performance expectation of an officer if you don't have clearly defined policies for them to follow. When I look at, and if you want to look at like clearly defined policies, look at what James has done with the video packaging
booking
guide.
chaos, yeah,
That is unequivocally clear. I mean, you can't you can't build a case for screwing things up when it's been demonstrated to you so clearly. So
yeah.
it's really incumbent on us. And you want to talk about this because this is
Yeah,
something
can I
that
just elaborate a little bit? So Russell, I know that, we all have those repeat offenders that you just get tired of explaining everything to. And I've watched some of our staff over the years perform the right of refusal process and the notification process to the deputies. And I know it can be sometimes create animosity. So what I teach or what I try to do in my day-to-day work too is make that an opportunity for uh, a positive opportunity. Let them know that, as evidence professionals, we're responsible for supporting them. We're a support service function, and we're responsible for supporting them. And in turn, what that means is that if they do something wrong, it's our job to come along and uh, correct them. But I try to make it as more of a like a learning or training environment and try to and right now we have some of the best guys in our unit that are outstanding at making people feel humble about fixing their evidence, and we get 90 to 100% response back when there's we call them snafus, but whenever there's issues. And that's in a department that has over 5,000 employees. So it's all about being humble, reminding them that you're the support service function for them. And if you could work in the fact that evidence is important to not only the victims but the integrity of the department and the way the process works, hopefully they'll see the light. And that's about the most
abs-
you could do. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it in our 2-day training class, in what I mean, everything is about relationships. I mean, you're not going to be effective. You're not going to be effective as an evidence manager if you can't cultivate relationships with people. The world just works like that. We can write all the policy we want. Uh, I will say that the better relationships that you're able to cultivate and develop, the more success you're going to have at getting people to be voluntarily compliant. Now, I will say I was a supervisor and a sworn supervisor in my role at our agency, and relationships were important to me. It was very important that people did what they were supposed to do because that's what they're supposed to do. But I will say there is a place if we can't do things and appeal to people's goodwill and good nature and provide them clear, consistent guidance on what to do, and they still continue to fail. Pain sometimes has to be applied
All
for people to learn. I mean,
right.
there has to be some kind of pain to hold people accountable. I wish it weren't that way, but sometimes that's the case. And depending on the culture at your agency, it might take pain. Uh, and I'm
As the
not
last
talking like,
resort.
yeah, I'm not talking like, just hitting somebody in the face. Uh, there are different levels of pain. Some of it is emotional. Uh, but that's kind of the cliff notes. I really appreciate James being here. We will
Thank you,
continue to
Sean.
work and integrate and try to be a little more of a, a team. I know I tend to talk a lot, and I'm trying, but
You're all over it though. You're good,
you know,
doing a good job.
so we'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. We appreciate you being here. Again, we hope that this is useful to you. If you've got feedback, please provide it to us. My short email is sean@evidencemanagement.com. I would welcome your feedback. We want to improve this. We want to continue to make it better. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to click the goodbye button soon.
Be
So,
safe, stay healthy
thank you, James.
too. Take care, Sean.